Welcome to Sector Report. I'm David Beatson. This week, dairy goats and how agriculture's best-kept secret is turning into one of its stellar performers. Shanghai pensions got the government's approval to buy the Crayfer farms, so what's their next step? And our farmers are ageing, but is the next generation ready to take over?
The money involved is huge now, and it's only getting more and more, so it does make it a lot harder, but just means you've got to work a bit harder as well.
Succession planning. It's one of the toughest tasks facing farming families, with the average age of our cattle or sheep farmers at 58 and young farmers stumping up well over $1 million to buy into the business. It's no wonder farm leaders are talking about the prospect of a lost generation in New Zealand agriculture. But how do we jump the hurdle? Well, rural correspondent Drew Chappell has been on the road to Methven, way down in the South Island, finding out.
Milking at dawn in mid-Canterbury is a far cry from the glamour of Hollywood, but these two Rakaia shear milkers have one thing in common with director James Cameron. They both want to own a Kiwi dairy farm. Chris and Lucy Morrissey are doing it the hard way though, 4 a.m. starts and strict budgeting of every spare cent. Such is the market for farms these days though, even that may not be enough.
The money involved is huge now, and it's only getting more and more, so it does make it a lot harder, but just means you've got to work a bit harder as well.
And we will have to accept help from
family.
Outside.
We know we can't do it ourselves, so it's just thinking a wee bit outside the square and seeing who else is going to will help you along and get involved.
The pair are self-confessed townies who, with little farming experience, took the plunge into milking almost straight out of uni. They answered a help wanted ad in the paper, albeit with some reservations.
I swore I wouldn't do it. I wasn't going to do it. I was going to commute and drive to town every day, but no, I was drawn in.
Yeah, Lucy came down and pulled on a few teats and saw milk spurting out and thought it was the most hilarious thing ever. Cow poo was like awful, smelled awful.
Yeah.
But only took a couple of days in the shed and she was addicted as much as anybody else. They put another couple $100 a week in our pocket, and
we had a wedding to pay for, and then we saved basically for 2 years, and we bought our first house. And so at the time, that was sort of the towny thing in us was buying a rental property, and so we bought 2 rental properties, and we've basically just built on that.
Use the equity in those to be able to borrow to go lower order shear milking.
The pair love mid-Canterbury and both are involved in community sports and activities, with Chris coaching the local under-15 rugby team. Their farming dream, however, might draw them to more northern pastures eventually. Their herd now consists of just 12 cows, but in the future they hope to expand that to more than 300 and go 50-50 share milking with an established farmer, meaning a larger slice of the milk check.
And then from there you borrow from off your cows and try and buy a bit of land. Lucy's parents would quite like to retire in
North Island.
About 10 years' time. So what would be quite good is to have enough money to go shares with them in a small dairy farm and have our own block so that they can get a bit of an income as investors, and we can run it how we want to run it, and it would be small blocks, so it would be sort of just us and a family farm would be great.
A helping hand from one or both sets of parents is often the only way some couples can ever get a footing in the industry. And as can be seen just a few minutes down the road from Chris and Lucy, having parents who already own a farm certainly makes things easier. Jeanette Maxwell has 3 teenage kids at home, all of whom are already pretty clear on what they want to do with the rest of their lives.
I'm really lucky our children know exactly what they want to do. So our oldest boy started Polytech and he's doing general engineering. Gabriel wants to do a fine arts degree and music, so she's already working well towards that. And our youngest son is absolutely going to be a farmer at this stage in his life.
This has made it easier for her to prepare a way into farming for for her youngest son, Rory.
This is my truck, it's a Toyota Hilux. I just started learning driving when I was about 12.
It's not simply a case, though, of putting him in the will and getting on with life.
Trips me.
It's quite interesting because he set this goal focus quite young. I think he was 5 or 6 when he decided. And he's already, in his mind, he's worked out at school where he needs to go. He's quite accepting of the fact that it's succession and that there has to be a fairway for his brothers and sisters. So he knows it's not going to be given to him. He knows he has to work his way through it to get there.
Come on, Dean.
The property needs to provide an income for 3 generations of the Maxwell family, an unusual situation, but one they have been planning for some time.
We have my father-in-law who comes up and visits during the day, and actually Alistair's brother is also just living in our cottage at the moment. We ourselves are supporting ourselves, and we're also working for the 3rd generation to come through, and he is also already starting to rear stock himself to help earn money to make a pathway through. So yeah, it is quite unusual to have 3 going at once.
Jeanette is hopeful for future generations, given the recent high returns in sheep and beef, especially in a climate like this one at the foot of Mount Hutt.
This is like almost a little microclimate in itself, apart from mid-Canterbury.
This is a really niche climate, and it's just because we're into the south side of Mount Hutt, and we've got the rain shadow. We're just trying to find a space where we could just create a little bit more fall, and we'd actually generate our own power, and we'll come off the grid.
Wow, but it's got to rain.
Well, we have plenty of rain here. A dry year is 1,200 mils.
Gee, okay.
But she says favourable conditions can also work against young farmers, as the relative value of good farming land continues to rise.
Canterbury's going to be expensive to start in. But then upon it, there's the potential to earn more income here because we've got flatlands, we've got foothills, there is irrigation, there is good rainfall, so it's more risk safe rather than, we could be more risk averse here. I mean, things happen, that's nature, but climatically it's really quite safe as a rule.
And back on their dairy farm up the road, Chris and Lucy, like most farmers here, love the area, but simply can't afford to stay.
Ideally, we ourselves, we enjoy Canterbury.
It's home.
It's great. Like, we love Ashburton. We've been in and around Ashburton now for
9 years.
9 years. We've owned property in Ashburton, and it's a great
We love it.
area to sort of be around, which is awesome.
There's nothing not to like about it, pretty much.
Succession planning is not a simple process, and the goal of farm ownership seems for some a distant dream. Encouraging for the country then that there are plenty of good, keen young people willing to work hard for as long as it takes.
Dairying's a good place to be at the moment, and we're just happy to be part of it, really.
Drew Chappell reporting. Coming up, succession planning of a different kind. What's next for the Shanghai Pension Group? Now it's got government approval to buy the Crayford Dairy Farm empire. Welcome back to Sector Report. Well, Shanghai Pension Group has once more gained government approval to take over 16 properties placed in receivership after the collapse of the Crayford Dairy Farm empire. But the group's major rivals haven't given up. There's another High Court appeal in the pipeline, and local iwi could lodge a treaty claim against Landcorp, SPG's nominated farm management contractor. On top of that, as we discussed in Sector Report last week, government officials are now developing a new policy statement on foreign direct investment. So how's all this going down with the Shanghai Pension Group? New Zealand spokesperson Cedric Allen joins me now. Cedric, welcome back. To start, are you able to actually move to settle with the receivers while there's still a legal appeal in the pipeline?
Well, David, the situation at the moment is that we have government approval to buy those farms. It's the second time we've had it, of course, and we can go unconditional and settle any time we want to. The issue is whether we should. There's no certainty over the timing of this appeal. We think the appeal is totally without merit. The point of the appeal has already been looked at by the Overseas Investment Office twice, considered by the government twice, and a High Court has ruled against the specific point. We think this is just a delay tactic.
But there's still an argument, there's still a process, there's still a court, and it's there.
Oh, indeed there is.
Is the receiver prepared to settle?
Oh, I'm sure the receiver would be prepared to settle. The issue is whether we are, and that's a legal point. There's risk involved, and that's something we're taking advice on at the moment.
Have you a deadline? Has the receiver put a deadline on you?
No, not at all. We're confident the whole transaction will proceed, and we just think it's a pity that this sort of behaviour is still carrying on, because it's certainly destroying the confidence of overseas investors in New Zealand as a place to invest.
What's happening to the properties in the meantime?
Well, in the meantime, the properties are being farmed by the receiver, as they have been for the last 3 years. We're keen to get in there and start putting our plans in place.
Have you got your plans developed? I mean, I hate to say it, but you've had quite a long time to actually develop plans.
We have. We've had 18 months of planning, David, and we're very keen to get in there and do things. As you know, we're working with Landcorp, and we're coming up to the time of the year where the herds will be dried off on those properties, and this is the big maintenance time for farmers. Mm-hmm. And what we want to do is develop a detailed management plan for each of the 16 farms, but we know the early priorities, which will be to improve the pasture, and that's a matter of stocking rates, it's a matter of fencing, paddock size and water reticulation. We've actually authorised the receiver to go ahead and spend close to $3 million on implementing some of these improvements already at our risk.
Tell me, do you require any consents of any sort to actually proceed with that?
No, not at all. In fact, we want to get the farms in a condition where they actually apply with requirements such as effluent disposal. Some of the houses need upgrading, they're in pretty shocking condition. And we want to upgrade the quality of the pasture and the quality of the herd. The receiver has actually been doing a good job of upgrading the herd with culling and buying new cows.
There are still several other Crayford Farm properties. Does Shanghai Pension have any interest in acquiring some or all of those properties to accumulate into this?
No, we have not.
Given the fact that you at least now know where you stand with the Government of New Zealand.
Yes, no, we've got no current interest in buying those farms. In fact, they're not even on the market.
Then can I turn to the other outstanding issue? What are you going to do to resolve the differences with the iwi that have some interest in the properties you've purchased?
There's two areas that the iwi are interested in. One is 2 par sites on our farms, and those par sites will be vested in the Crown, and arrangements will be made to enable iwi to have access to them. The other outstanding issue is that the iwi have expressed interest in buying a couple of the farms. We didn't, of course, buy them to sell them, but we will have discussions with iwi. We'd be sympathetic to some form of transaction on a commercial basis, of course, that might involve a swap of farms rather than a straight sale. We'll just see what comes up, but certainly discussions with iwi are on the...
So there are some discussions in train?
Oh, we've already had discussions with all of the relevant iwi.
I know, but I mean, are there discussions in train now?
Not on that specific point.
Okay. Tell me, on the other hand, to what extent is Shanghai Pension committed to current supply arrangements from those farms to Fonterra?
Oh, we're totally committed. The way the Fonterra supply arrangements work is that every February you have to declare whether you're going to be a supplier in the following season. All of the milk from these farms is going to Fonterra. Mm-hmm. If we decide to change that, that will be a matter of giving the required amount of notice or negotiating a different arrangement.
Do you recall how much notice you have to give?
No, it's just a matter of reconfirming the arrangements by February of each year.
Okay. So,
David, I should make it clear that we may well end up working with Fonterra to process the milk. Mm-hmm. We're very keen on working with Fonterra in New Zealand and in China. In fact, the chairman of our company was at the opening of the second Fonterra dairy farm in China just a few weeks ago. So the way we may move forward is that we will let some contracts for manufacturing and packaging to Fonterra early on, so that we can actually get some product up into China and on the supermarket shelves and start to prove the theory.
So you've got a company structure up. I know that there is some limitation on your ability to develop vertically integrated production processing and indeed export operations. Do I hear in this that you're actually considering Fonterra as your 50% New Zealand partner in such ventures?
It may not work like that. It may be that we will move forward with contract manufacturing and packaging on long-term contracts or short-term contracts. That may or may not be supplanted by an arrangement to invest in a New Zealand processor, or we may start from scratch with New Zealand partners and develop a new processing facility in the North Island. So all those options are on the table.
I see you brought your branded hat. Is this a signal of things to come?
It is. Milk New Zealand will be the company that is involved in processing with New Zealand partners, and as you know, we're not allowed to own more than 50% of a processing operation in New Zealand, nor do we want to. It's not an area of expertise. It's one of the reasons we've come here, and we think it's a good thing that New Zealanders will have the opportunity to own at least half of any processing operation that's working to produce product for us.
Well, having gone through the hoops for now over 18 months, nearly 2 years, with a couple of hoops still to go, we hear that officials are currently working on a detailed policy framework to assist in targeting, attracting and utilising foreign direct investment. What are you hoping you might see there?
It's not really for us to tell the New Zealand government what to do, but you can observe that there is some disquiet in the country about selling assets overseas. On the other hand, it has long been New Zealand's policy to attract overseas investment. You would have to say that the present system is not working perfectly. I think the areas that we would criticise is the length of decision making. If it's going to take more than a year to get a decision about whether an overseas investor can actually buy something, you're not going to get many overseas investors taking part in auctions or tenders. It just becomes impossible because the vendor is not going to want to put a condition of a year or 18 months on a transaction. It puts the overseas investor at a big disadvantage to a local purchaser. If overseas investors pull out of New Zealand, then farm values frankly will fall.
Can you see a way of knocking that hurdle out of the way without actually causing more outrage?
It should be possible to put a time limit on the amount of time it takes to make a decision. The second area I think there's considerable disquiet over is the recent requirement to invent a mythical purchaser from New Zealand to compare against a real purchaser from overseas. I think that's an area that needs to be looked at and tidied up because, again, it's deeply unattractive to overseas investors to face continual appeals to a court after the Overseas Investment Office and the government have made a decision.
Cedric Allen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cedric Allen representing the Shanghai Pengjin Group. And next, how one of agriculture's best kept secrets is suddenly turning into a stellar performer. Stay with Sector Report. There's been a big surge in international demand for goat's milk products, so big that it's got the dairy goat sector scrabbling to find new recruits. In the past 2 years, demand has grown 60%, mainly from Asia, with annual sales revenue topping $100 million. But that's nothing to what's coming. The co-op says exports to Europe could increase tenfold in the next 5 years. So what's suddenly driving this new demand from Europe? To find out, we're talking to the Dairy Goat Cooperative's Chief Executive, Dave Stanley. Welcome, Dave. Europe is traditionally a pretty tough market for New Zealand farm producers to crack. What's happened to create this opportunity?
We've got a quite individual product, and we've actually been selling in Europe for nearly 20 years, but we haven't been able to claim that our product is an infant formula. So over the last decade, we've carried out 2 clinical trials. We've spent $3 million, and we've submitted clinical evidence to the European Food Safety Authority. And they have just come out quite recently and said, yes, we accept this, and they've recommended to the European Parliament that the infant formula laws get changed to include goat milk infant formula.
Okay, but I mean, what did you actually have to demonstrate that you hadn't done already?
We had to demonstrate to a level of very high clinical satisfaction that the product was both safe and completely nutritious for a young child.
Just how much of a growth prospect can you identify now that you've cracked this necessity of demonstrating that you are an accreditable infant formula producer?
The prospects in front of us are quite huge, not just Europe, because we're still going to be another 1 to 2 years before the European Parliament actually adopts the changes. It's quite a slow beast over there to do these things, but we're also experiencing very, very strong growth in 7 or 8 of our markets around the world. Would
it be easy and even more lucrative to see it as a conversion prospect for a dairy farm?
For a smaller dairy farm, for a farmer who's on...
Or an adjunct to a dairy farm?
Or an adjunct. You know, we've got a couple of people looking at that right now. For a smaller dairy farm, the 100, 150 to 200 acres, they are becoming less profitable on cows now. The cow farms have got much bigger. So for a smaller dairy farm, it can be a very, very profitable move.
What's the supply of livestock like?
The supply of livestock, there's plenty of young stock available. You can't go out and buy a milking herd. There just aren't that number of animals about. So it's a matter of securing the kids, which we can help farmers with, and then rearing them. They're in milk at 1 year of age, so they're very quick to get into a commercial operation.
Are they difficult critters to manage?
No, they're lovely critters to manage.
Are they? Yeah. Well, a goat farmer would say that.
Well, I'm not a goat farmer, but
I mean, what about the worms? I understand they have worms.
The worms, yeah, they have worms, just like sheep have worms and cows have worms.
Yeah.
The worms have been a challenge, and basically the way our farmers have overcome them is we actually farm them, we cut and carry, so we house the goats in a barn and we cut the grass and bring it to them, so that breaks the worm cycle.
Okay, bearing in mind the setup costs that you've referred to, what kind of payback period is there?
Well, we'd be looking at an average farmer's income of around $900,000 to $1 million, so it's a good return.
You've talked about the fact that the returns have been historically very stable.
Yes.
And consistently reasonably high. But you also say you've had a brilliant foreign exchange hedging policy. Now, how instrumental is that in continuing to achieve the kind of payback that you're historically talking about?
Yeah, it won't. To really do well out of a foreign exchange hedging policy, you've got to have a low exchange rate to take your cover off. There's been 2 very low points in the dollar in the last 10 years. In 2001, it dropped down to about 40 cents. We took a heck of a lot of cover then. And in 2009, it went down to 50 cents, and we took a lot of cover then. So we've made a lot of money, but most of the profits out of the foreign exchange dealing we've actually ploughed back into the infrastructure.
Realise them and reinvest it.
Yeah.
Okay, one final question. If the growth prospects are stellar, as you say, how come there aren't more goat farmers already?
There's a number of reasons for that. First of all, and I think probably one of the main ones, is we've kept a very, very low profile. Secondly, the growth that we've had, we've favoured our own farmers rather than bringing in new ones. And I think the fact that the cow dairy industry is doing very, very well at the moment makes people a bit slow to come across. And just the sheer speed of the growth we've had in the last 2 years means that our need for new farmers now is quite urgent.
So you're forced to come out from undercover?
We are forced to come out from undercover.
The growth's too good to keep it a secret?
Well, the growth is good. I mean, I was doing a staff training day recently, and I worked out someone around the world is buying a can of our products every 4 seconds. So that's 24/7, 365 days of the year. We sell a can of our goat milk infant formula every 4 seconds. So that's the scale of the industry now.
Oh, you have to get it down to 2 now.
Well, we need more milk, but I think we can do that. Yeah,
okay.
I think that's quite achievable.
Dave Stanley, thank you very much. Dave Stanley, Chief Executive of the Dairy Goat Cooperative. And that's all for this week. Next week, our rural correspondent Drew Chappell checks out the maize harvest and what's in store for the country's grain growers. And remember, you can check out our programs anytime online at country99tv.co.nz. Thanks for your company. I'm David Beatson for Sector Report. See you next week.